Good evening. You're on the smoking section with Steve Helfer and my friend and sometime co-host, I guess you might say. You could be co-host by now.
Oh my gosh, wow, I've been promoted.
And elevation, yes. I've been elevating people a lot. Emily got elevated, and you know, you can be elevated now.
All right. I'll be
co-host, occasional co-host.
Can I be Rear Admiral?
Rear Admiral. Anyway, listen. You know, it was interesting. I was looking at the New York Times today, and there was the federal guidelines about dental flossing.
Wow, I didn't know that there were federal guidelines.
Yes, well,
about dental flossing.
They are suggested on some federal website, but according to this article I read, which was not a terribly serious article, but I think it appeared to be rather factual.
Right.
The federal government is no longer putting recommendation to dental floss because there is some kind of law or regulation that they can't make any kind of advisory unless there's scientific evidence. And even though it's been on the
music to my ears.
Really? Well, even though the federal government has on one website from some agency, and even though all dentists, I think all dentists, highly recommend flossing, according to this article in the Times.
Where's your data to support that?
Well, that's the question that appeared some jerk asked.
Do dentists actually recommend flossing?
Oh yeah, oh for sure.
You're sure of this?
Yeah, well, I don't know about all dentists. Every dentist I've had, let's put it that way.
Okay, well.
That's a small sample size, I agree.
I think I've probably seen 1.5 dentists in my whole life, so.
You haven't been to a lot of dentists?
No, I'm afraid not.
Take my word for it.
They recommend flossing.
Oh, yes,
right.
yes. And
I know it's a cultural trope, practically, but when it comes down to it, I don't know.
You mean, when you say cultural trope, you mean something, a popular perception? Is that what trope means?
Sure. Yeah, that's.
Is that your definition of the word trope?
Yeah.
Well, according to this article, there is no scientific evidence that flossing really does much at all. And so evidently there's also some regulation that that the federal government can't put an advisory when there isn't evidence, and so they've taken it down.
Okay, I feel like so far this is a step in the right direction.
In the federal government?
Ooh, yeah. Where are you gonna spring something on me?
No, not really. But I mean, it's kind of every dentist has said that. Let's say just take my word for that.
Okay.
And the federal government has said that, and it certainly seems reasonable to think that flossing benefits the teeth and the gums, and yet evidently there is no scientific evidence that that is so, and the few studies that have been done are very equivocal, and it's probably hard to get volunteers to. But that's just a kind of a light aside, and so you came in with a vocabulary word, which here at the smoking section we're always very interested in new vocabulary words.
In trivial knowledge?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's trivial, but it's hard to determine what is trivial and what is not.
The word of the day. Today's show is brought to you by the word nootropics.
Nootropics.
Assuming I'm pronouncing it correctly.
And what is nootropics?
As far as I can tell, it's a description of cognitive enhancers.
And where did you come across this word?
Researching nicotine.
Oh, really? You did some research on nicotine?
I know. It probably would surprise you.
Do you want to tell us? Do you want to tell us what you found?
What I found is that there's a study by Heishman and I think Kleppman or Kleppeman. There's one other author.
Oh, Kleipman or something like that. Yes, go ahead.
Do you know these authors?
No, I mean, that name sounds a little familiar.
Heichman?
No, that name doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, well, they've done a meta-analysis of different studies concerning the cognitive effects of nicotine.
Yes.
And it seemed like for a long time it was quite difficult to tell whether or not the cognitive effects of nicotine were actually due to cognitive enhancement or whether it was simply negating the withdrawal symptoms, because sometimes it seems like some of these studies focused on people who were already avid users of nicotine.
Yeah, in the form of tobacco, most
right,
probably.
so if you
Yes.
deprive them for 4 hours of their source of nicotine and you give them a math test or something, they do poorly, and then you give them nicotine and then they do well. Surprise, nicotine, solved the problem that it created.
Right. If that, yes, that's one scenario, one hypothesis.
That is one scenario, and it was hard to tell for a while.
One hypothesis.
It was hard to tell for many years whether that description, that scenario was the sole origin of the cognitive enhancement effects that were observed in nicotine.
Yeah.
Or as a result of nicotine. But this most recent meta-analysis seems to indicate that they had studies that actually included non-nicotine users or non-smokers and people who had never smoked or never used nicotine. And in fact, there were studies that showed no effect and studies that showed an effect, but overall the conclusion of the authors in the meta-analysis was that there was there was a noticeable, statistically
right.
significant effect improving cognitive abilities.
And it's not simply removing withdrawal symptoms.
Correct.
It's
That was the key conclusion of this study, is that we now have enough data accumulated that we can say it's not just withdrawal symptoms.
But
not just correct.
But surely there's many, many more studies in this particular meta-analysis.
Well, no, are there other meta-analysis?
Well, I would assume...
Meta-analyses, or is this simply the only... What are you asking? There's many studies, yes, but a meta-analysis, the point is to look at a lot of different studies
right.
and sort of sum up, right? Because we've spoken before about how one study out of 20 should show up with statistically significant results.
I don't buy that. I know you say that, and I know that that's a convention. But if I throw a ball up in the air 20 times, I don't think one time it's not going to stay up there, right?
Well, okay, but
and if I administer
yeah.
cyanide, like for example,
yeah.
At Jim Jones has administered cyanide to 400 or 500 of his followers. Mm-hmm. In British Guiana, I think it was, or Guyana. Okay. And, it wasn't like 1 out of 20 of them walked away feeling happy. It was like 500 of 500 died. Everyone who
right.
took the
yeah.
dosage. So I don't buy this 1 out of 20, you can expect some kind of random result.
Well, so I think we are talking about very different effects. As I've mentioned before on the show, and I cannot stress enough,
yes,
all the large effects in nature are pretty well described. Maybe not perfectly, but pretty well described. Something like gravity has the overwhelming effect on the motion of a falling object, but there are other effects like turbulence in the air, right? The smaller effects are the things that science is most concerned about nowadays.
Because you say that all the low-hanging fruit has
already been picked, yeah.
And so you're born.
There's probably some low-hanging fruit still out there.
Johannes Salk discovered the polio vaccine, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
That's a low-hanging fruit.
I don't really, I suppose. I don't know how much of a low-hanging fruit.
All I'm saying is that I've heard this 1 out of 20, and it's called a confidence ratio, I think, or interval or something like that.
There's a thing called the confidence interval, yeah.
That's 1 out of 20, right?
So it depends on what level of confidence you want.
Right.
So the confidence interval gets larger. If
I
you
don't know.
wanna-
It's explained to me a lot.
Let me finish. If
Go
you want
ahead.
the percentage of your confidence to go up, if you want to say, for sure, the answer is within this interval with 99% confidence, you have to pick a bigger interval, right?
Well,
you want
I
to
think-
say, for sure, the answer is within this interval with 68% confidence, then you pick a smaller interval. You are allowed to.
I don't even know what the word confidence means. Do you mean correct or incorrect, accurate or inaccurate?
So the confidence interval is essentially with what probability you think that the true population mean lies within a certain distance from what you got in your experiment.
Okay, well, I'm getting.
I know that's a lot to swallow at once.
It's above my head. It's above my head, and
I think you
it's
did
highly
yourself a disservice
statistical
by saying that.
Well, it
It's
is.
not above your
I'll try to
head.
get
Just
back to
takes
it,
some time.
but I've seen people say, you can expect 1 out of 20. If you do a study of a certain phenomenon, that 1 out of 20 times you're going to get kind of a random result. And I don't think it works. I mean, it doesn't work most of the time. And I don't know how, I know that this is a very big standard in statistics.
Okay.
And I'm just not sure I buy it, and I don't buy it.
Okay.
I don't understand it, and I don't buy it.
I can't hope to communicate the whole concept to you in half an hour, but maybe we could start with a small piece of it. If I told you that something only happens 1 in 20 times, okay?
Okay, yes.
But then it just kept happening repeatedly. In fact, it happened 9 out of 10 times.
Right.
We did it 100 times,
Right.
and 90 of those times it happened.
Yes.
Wouldn't you start to doubt my first statement about it only happening?
Yes, I would.
Okay, that's precisely how these studies work. You say if the effect that we are studying, if it didn't exist, we would only expect to see the results that we're seeing 1 in 20 times.
Okay. Why 1 in 20?
Well, I mean, it could be rarer.
Right.
We could pick a more stringent requirement. We could say,
Well,
in other words, we say that it's significant if it happens less frequently than 1 in 20, actually. 1 in 20 is sort of the bar. If our results indicate that this should only happen 1 in 40 times or 1 in 50 times.
You seem to be very
excited?
hung up on statistics, if you forgive me.
Hung up.
For example,
Hung up as in love?
kind of.
Yeah, I'm kind of in love with statistics.
Okay. And we'll never trust any statistics that you don't rig yourself. That's the first rule of statistics. I've only repeated it about 5 or 6 times thus far since I first started.
This week, yeah, maybe 5 or 6, but you're forgetting last week.
Anyway, there was a biologist or a physician who said, cancer is biology, it's not statistics. And, in the last...
And you believe that?
Well, he's making some points. In the last 60 years, since the war on smoking, the modern war on smoking began, the whole shift of science in terms of, I guess you would call the life sciences, meaning having to do with human health and disease, have shifted from biological experimentation, animal experimentation, a thorough understanding of cause and effect, and it's gone to we'll take a statistical analysis, and if it happens, a certain number of times, then we'll say that the cause is there.
Well, okay.
That's epidemiology.
I think we've talked about my hesitation in using the word cause.
Ah, yes. Well, okay, but see, that's all right. Keldin.
But if we were to drop the use of the word cause would you be satisfied?
I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe I would.
So, I mean, if it really just comes down to a word that some scientists happen to use carelessly.
What, the word cause, you mean?
Yeah. You know, I'm looking for, if that's all it is, then I can't really,
for example,
there's nothing to explain except that they've been careless.
Well, Keldin,
Maybe they're not. Maybe I just misunderstand how they use the word, but maybe
because you're not involved in the life sciences so much.
Not so much.
I'm not even sure what the life sciences are. What's that? Medicine and biology? And botany? I don't know.
Yeah, animal husbandry.
No, I don't think so. I mean,
horticulture. Not to make light of those people, they are feeding everyone. But
I have okay. Now there's a young man, and I'm going to give you a copy of this document. I just think it's amazing, frankly, who is working. He's a Harvard student.
Okay.
And he is. I think he's into neurobiology, and
sounds hard.
Well, I think there's a lot of hype in neurobiology, neuroscience these days. You know, in terms of prediction, and you know, this side of your brain lights up, and you know that means this, and so forth and so on. But he gave me this document, which I'm going to give to you for maybe for next month. But you know, when you come on, if you choose to return. But one thing he says here that's kind of interesting is he has been in contact with a very interesting anti-smoker by the name of Simon Chapman, who's from Australia.
Okay.
Who can be really nasty and is really very, very almost unbalanced in his hatred of the tobacco industry and his hatred of smoking. But he's very interesting also because sometimes he will attack anti-smokers as, you know, not using good evidence and and also compromising people's autonomy.
Okay.
And well, I'm curious about what
why
you think.
should I be interested in this guy?
Well, no, there's no real reason. But let me just ask you one question.
Can we talk about confidence intervals?
No, I don't want to talk about that anymore. I'm tired of that.
Can I have another go at explaining?
No, not this time, if you don't mind.
Finish.
It's my program.
True, it is you.
Okay,
this is the risk of promoting me to.
Okay, here's a
Rear
question.
Admiral.
Thank you. Yes, right.
And now
You get uppity, right?
I get uppity.
Here is the question I have. Okay, this young fellow has written this amazing document.
Okay.
And he says, at the heart of my project is this ethical quandary. Is it right to spread non-scientific fear about the dangers of smoking, secondhand smoke, e-cigarettes, if this fear causes fewer people to die prematurely of tobacco-related illnesses?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a question he puts there. Do you have an opinion? Is that something that you have an opinion on? As a lay person in this regard, but you know, you're interested in.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a very clear analogy in the nuclear industry, which is that every scientist knows there's no such thing as 100% certainty, right? Mm-hmm. But that starts to sound like it's very dissatisfying to people when you say, well, we can't be 100% certain. There's just no such thing. So in an attempt to be as precise in your language as possible, you end up saying something that it actually spreads fear. I mean, you can't say with 100% certainty that this geologic repository is not going to someday in the future release radionuclides into the environment.
Heaven forbid, heaven forbid.
Yeah, and there's literally no way that you can be 100% certain. You can only only be arbitrarily close to 100%. So if you
Yes.
say, oh no, the law demands that you're 99.99999% certain, you can do that. You can
Right.
put a price tag on that and do all the engineering to be sure that you are 99.9999%.
Right, so
You
what?
cannot be
How does that
100%.
relate to what I just read? I don't even understand how it relates to
I'm
what
sorry. So how that relates to what you just read is that what do you say to somebody who says, is it safe?
Aha, you mean is smoking safe?
Yes. Or is a geologic repository for spent nuclear fuel safe?
Well, I mean, the question
It
is,
is
if the government has
0.9.
decided that smoking is not desirable amongst the population, and the government, let's say, has decided, and zealots, or let's say activists, have decided that, is it right? Is it ethical? Is it moral to spread exaggerated fears, let's say about the risk of smoking, or the risk of secondhand smoke, or the effect of
Right.
teenagers? Is that ethical?
My current opinion is that it's not ethical, but I belong to the industry with the worst PR in the world.
You mean
right?
nuclear industry?
Right. We
You
walk
think it's
around trying to speak as accurately as possible,
think
and it
it's
makes
as-
people afraid.
You think it's as bad as the tobacco industry in terms of their PR?
I can't even begin to compare them. I want so badly to compare them.
Well, go ahead.
Right
Look,
now.
you don't have to give me a long comparison.
I don't know
because we're running
how.
out of
I
time.
really don't know how. What do you
Well,
mean?
certainly the tobacco industry has lost the war, or to a large extent, or to a great extent. I wouldn't say they've lost the war, but most people have this image of the tobacco industry as being an arch villain.
Right.
And this has been because they lost the PR war, right?
Or they lost the science war.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
No, I was actually attempting to draw a comparison between the struggle that nuclear engineers face and the struggle that this guy is facing what is he, an epidemiologist?
No, this fellow is a neurobiologist.
Neurobiologist.
And
all right.
he's an undergraduate. He's like you. He's an undergraduate.
Okay.
And he is taking some time off to work with an organization called the SAFRA Institute, which is an institute at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, which, I don't know, studies ethics in business or something, like institutional corruption or something. And he has applied there, and he's going to do a paper, and he's going to look at, to some extent, he's going to look at the ethics of the anti-smoking industry, and which is a real departure from what the SAFRA usually does. Keldin, we've only got 12 seconds, so I'm going to let you, now 9, 8, go ahead.
Well, I just want to thank you.
Thanks for coming on,
the show.
and I'm going to give you this article.